Maria, I really appreciate you talking with me today. This is my sixth or seventh tech exec conversation. Very excited about talking to you today about what I would call project governance or governance of projects in a um, in a corporation at an enterprise. But it sounds like there's like some new terminology, some new vernacular that you're going to educate me on, which I'm looking forward to. And I'd love for you just to explain, your background and what you do currently and what you've done in the past. And
Yeah,
I'll ask some questions as we go forward.
sounds good. Yeah, so my background is really in the cable TV, uh, cable communications realm. I spent most of my career going from one cable company to another as they consolidated, and finally worked up to Comcast for like 10 years. And then there I was doing a number of things, including program management, product development, product deployment. What I love about all of those kind of efforts is that you're dealing with engineering, you're dealing with marketing, you're dealing with pretty much every aspect of the company is putting out a product, right? And so you have this very sort of 360 view of how the enterprise works and how you're going to get things done.
And from a angle standpoint, what is, seeing how things get done, do you come from a particular background like IT or like marketing or like finance that gives you,
Yeah,
a starting point or a launch pad within projects?
yeah, it really did start. I started in journalism actually, and worked for a newsletter and a what we called a fact book. It's around here somewhere, on the cable industry. And then when I moved out to Denver, I started working with MSOs directly on product initiatives, product management. And, so like I said, there's some marketing in there, there's some engineering. Some engineers didn't know I wasn't an engineer, because I was, I'm like, "You can so do that," but, they found out sooner or later. I was just playing one on TV.
Well, that actually is probably a badge of honor or like some sort of like scalp that you can kind of like take away because most engineers try and sniff out the wannabes, they would call it, or people that like trying to talk the talk but can't really walk the walk. If you were able to do it for any length of time, that's really kudos, I think, from your perspective or from their perspective to you.
Well, like I said, I think it was more because I was pushing them. Um,
So they
Yep,
wouldn't
they
talk
didn't
back.
they didn't question that too much,
Yeah.
but yeah, you have to know, you have to know the details of your product. And while I may not be an electrical engineer, I know, a network path can be created to, you know, cache video on demand in what places and so forth. So I could understand it well enough to at least speak the product, maybe not other concepts that they might have learned in school.
Sure. And let's talk a little bit about just journalism for a second and how that kind of helps you kind of understand requirements or analyze large pieces of data that are on a page or on a, I don't know, like an iPad nowadays, or and you're able to like really like water it down for people in the business or in marketing or in IT. Do you feel, from what I've heard and what I just said there, you think journalism's a good place to come from to go into what you do now?
I think what has moved my career along and really made me a distinct value add, has been the ability to communicate what are very technical or very complex problems and solutions into the benefits that it poses to the customer or to the company if we do it like this. Sometimes that doesn't come across from engineering or IT to your executive level. So I think it started with journalism. It started with my unknown propensity to enjoy the engineering, and enjoy the solutioning side of it. But also to be able to say, okay, I now see what you're saying. Now let's translate it to why this company should do it. What's the benefit of that? What's the business case around that? And then getting my MBA as well, especially getting an executive MBA was really important because I was applying those concepts I was going to school on Friday and Saturday and applying on Monday. If I had gone to MBA school right after college, I wouldn't know why it was relevant, right? But now I'm like, okay, we need to apply this capital model, and that will explain to the business why we need to go this way, right? Um, and so having that background as well, I think really helped.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, there's a certain time I think in your career where like an MBA really accelerates your ability to talk business and then potentially help like technology people do better for the business and support the business in those organizations that look at it from a methodology standpoint. And I think that that's a good segue back into like the project governance. You know, any environment that I've worked with, the methodology, project methodology is like in servient is set up as a service or a support structure for the business. Sometimes technology people don't want to hear that, specifically developers, I think. But ultimately, and I don't say that I say that kind of tongue in cheek, you know. They do generally, especially after a few years working, they understand that you know the business is where the money's made and the deals are done and all that kind of good stuff. But from your standpoint, and you know, governing projects and what's the best methodology, or are there a couple of methodologies you like to bring together and then explain to both business and technical stakeholders and every other organization that's involved in projects like why this is the best way to go forward?
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit, more specifically. So now I'm with Slalom. I'm working with a variety of clients on what we're calling communities of practice in order to govern some of their technical standards, right? And what was happening, and where I think this is a really interesting methodology, is what was happening is we've empowered through Agile and DevSecOps, models. We've empowered teams, development teams, to deploy, create your application and deploy it. But we found that there were a number of different development teams, doing a number of different things and deploying in different ways. And particularly on the cloud, if they were used to deploying on prem and then moving to the cloud, they were lifting and shifting their application where the application might be more modernized and so forth. So one of the things um, that we prescribe, or actually we're working on, was how do we get multiple functions and multiple silos together to create standards that the company can then follow in application development, in infrastructure operations, and so forth. And what it did was it really started to break down those silos between different application groups, architecture, ops, network operations groups, people who are operating on the cloud, et cetera, versus on-prem. And they really hadn't thought to talk together about what they were doing and some of those best practices, never mind create a standard. And that standard helps to um, really to mitigate a lot of the work that the developers were doing on their own, and say, you know what, let's just copy this one pipeline, or develop one pipeline we can all use. Security will trust it, and we'll use these standards so that they trust it. So it's been a real ground up and empowering, like you want to do with Agile and DevSecOps. You want to have those people empowered, but you want to also bring them together so that the company is doing the same thing the same way, and you're deploying applications in a trusted fashion, right? You know it wouldn't deploy because it was using the pipeline that has the gates for security in it. Um, and so because we wrote that standard, and it's been really it's had this over under effect. So over the top line, reduce operational complexity, give back developers time that they were spending creating their own pipelines, creating their own containers, creating their own goldfish eggs, and then that's like all on the top line. It's pretty measurable. I've anecdotally heard it's at least a 20% cut in application developer time that they can put back toward feature and functionality. And then for the underlying, you've got people who are not coming together. It's a community of practice, right? It's not a mandate from security, you must. It's a community that's sharing best practices amongst themselves. And since they came from maybe different places, um, one arm didn't know what the other arm was doing, and and are now adopting it because they wrote the standard against it. So it's been a really, eye-opening and impactful way to once again empower your your um, your developers and your architects to create solutions that are better for the company.
That's really interesting. I've got like a couple of things to kind of ask and then maybe follow on from that. So, first of all, the community of service concept, is that something that was created internally, or was it something you borrowed from another methodology?
I think the unique approach that we've done is apply it to the cloud, for our clients, and I think that that's where we saw it really helps because different groups have different maturity levels on the cloud, and even the company itself had a different maturity level. So some people were way ahead, and some people were, like I said, lifting and shifting applications and not really taking advantage of some of the services that are available. And so I think that's one of those scenarios. I can see another scenario where this works very well, which happened to be in one of my clients as well, which is when you have I grew through acquisition, so you might have many arms and many different IT pieces coming together, and you're trying to get those synergies. And people who are being acquired feel like they didn't have a voice, and this is giving them a voice to saying, "No, we should operate like this. We can, move together and capture those synergies if we talk and serve our best practices."
Interesting, yeah, like having witnessed large acquisitions and then different parts of the business being siloed or a different and like an acquisition just being acquired for the sake of like trying to like if I can't beat them, well they can join us because we're just a bigger client. That's a good way to integrate maybe at a top line, at a top from a top line standpoint to convince people of saving 20% and making it measurable and quantifiable. When you go to offer up suggestions or solutions like that in your client because you're a client, you work for a client driven organization, where do you start with like suggesting this kind of new way of bringing different like technical personalities together? 'Cause I'm sure sometimes it's hard when it's like that's the way it's always been done, why would I change it now? And I'm not talking about the top line because the top line is quantifiable straight off the bat, but like at a like more grassroots level, it's also about how you feel about change, right? It's not just about quantity or something that's quantifiable. It's like, hey, we can make this better for you. And you can work on the cool stuff like customization and building new features and just having fun, which I understand as a layman sounds great to me. But like people in security and people in software development, people in test that all have like real skin in the game. Like, how do you bring those stakeholders together and like justify this? I suppose.
I think that, the testimonials and like I said, we are seeing real impacts and real results. I think what else resonates is again, it empowers that application team. So it's not a mandate coming down, right? I mean, it's slower. It's a slower process. I can guarantee you that. Um, but it's because it is grassroots and you do have to get people's voices all heard and it gone into that standard. And then there's compliance and there's other things behind that, or that you have to do again after that. But what I feel makes it stick is it's not a mandate down, right? It's not a you must do it this way. That you've had a voice in it, that you understand why your concept didn't get in. I liken it to my husband was a Green Beret, right? And they spend days, planning a mission, and everybody has a different voice, a different persona, right? I'm the communications guy. Somebody's the demo guy. Somebody's the sniper guy, whatever. They all have their MOS. Um, and so when they come together and they plan, they put everything together. When they run, meaning the standard is now blessed, there's no questioning. There's not, there's no my idea didn't get in. It didn't get in because we discussed it and here's why it's out. And then you running with that plan. There's no more talk about it, right? I can't hear you. I'm sorry, Greg.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're basically giving someone the basically giving them the floor to explain why they may not want to do it this way, but at least you're giving them like, the response that they deserve, or like, the reasonable rejection that they want to have. And then it's like, well, actually, here's why it works. So it's like
Yep.
hearing everybody out, but still understanding like the outcome is like more important. Um, so looking at it from then, like from your perspective, well, when you come in with like a new way of working, let's say it's like a smaller company or another company that's been acquired and by a bigger company, and you're telling people this is a new way of working. There's obviously like some sort of like a sponsor. How do you continually keep the sponsor up to date to show just outside of like information? What do you do to convince the sponsor that it's going to work, and then the I suppose the outcomes that we talked about.
So, some of the outcomes, well, for one thing, the standards are, related and written and voted on within those communities of practice, but then they have to go up to an executive governance team to also accept them. So they're seeing that work, right? And that executive governance team is generally a representation of some of the people in the VP of some of the people in the COP. There's a couple of things. So they'll see the standards coming every month, right? Um, and the thought that was put into them, as well as how to measure whether we're in compliance or not. So that's included in the standard. Um, and it's not, like I said, like a NIST security standard. It's more of a, hey, the best way to stand up an EC2 instance is to do this, right? Um, and so the standards are going through, everybody's like agreed on them, and the VPs see that all happening. Our sponsor has come from a couple different places for this. And one was, IT, for sure. One was architects, the group that, the senior vice president of all of the software architects who are supposed to look at things and make sure they have best practices. But now you're educating everybody, right? On not just the standard, but here's why you should do it this way, right? Everybody's coming up a maturity level. And instead of going to the lowest common, denominator of maturity or knowledge base, everybody's coming up and getting elevated. And they see that too. Um, which I think is another impact that, is coming on board here. One of the one of the things that we also set up is, to solution for a specific problem. Like my cloud expense is just getting too high. Well, one COP we have is focused on everything you can do to optimize your cloud instance, right? From an expense standpoint, but also with resiliency and other, considerations. So you're almost attacking it by that problem alone, and then that just saves money, right? They can see that.
Yeah, and that's for VPs who own budgets and have resources allocated to this. That's how you convince them that it works. On like phases of like using this, do you do like retrospectives with steering committees or people that are involved in it at a decision making level?
Mostly what I've seen is, put together a deck every other month or so to make sure that we're adding value. And like I said, there's value add that you wouldn't expect, and I call it that below the line value of these guys just decided to work together because there was a problem with, we were writing a standard that there was no solution for. So they created a solution. Like that was outside of the communities of practice, but they did it because they saw the need and they saw, two people doing it three different ways and consolidated one tool set, for example, to make that happen. Right? That means licenses no longer have to be paid out for the other 2 tool sets, and, one was custom developing it while the other one had, put together some open source software, to attack the same problem. So they're seeing these other ancillary benefits of, "Oh, we just consolidated a tool set. That's great," you know?
Things there right now. So it's and knowing you and having talked to you before, I know you work with some large clients. It sounds like there already has to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, there already has to be some sort of like a maturity level built in to understand why governance has some importance, regardless of if it goes up a level. It's the next step in like let's say governance.
I'll say this, that, starting it up took a long time. It took some muscle memory, it took some cadence memory, it the members, there's maybe not objectors, but some of the members were, I don't get why we're doing this. What does he know? What does she know? To tell me what to do. And there was definitely some, newness to it, like anything as a change. I think the way you overcome that is make it as lightweight as possible. So these are people with full-time jobs on their own, and we're asking them to come together once a week and attack and review and write a standard, right? And then send that up. So as much as we can frame it out for them as possible, give them a subject matter expert or some documentation that will help them write it, and then customize it to their own enterprise. That anything we can do to help that be as lightweight as possible, and then show them the impact, right? Not just you got a standard pass through the GT, but look, we're complying with it. Look, everybody's doing it. um, and that's actually been the hardest part, right? Is to make sure that adoption is being captured. Um, but we're working on that too.
Utilized now as like a best practice from Slalom's standpoint, or is it you showing people how to do it, and this is going to grow as like a company initiative as a way to like work with clients?
Well, I think there's certainly been a lot of, practices that use something like this, data governance and
That's what it
security
reminds.
governance.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of, data governance, like the best data practices and stuff. So it definitely sounds like that's similar.
Yep. I think using it to apply to sort of application governance or infrastructure governance is where we've taken it. And I think it's a bit more, what we're trying to make it be is a bit more, like I said, sort of application developer architecture empowering, and a little less stringent in terms of what you would get from a security policy or a security set of standards, right? Security is our underlying, piece in here. Everything has to sort of comply with that. But these are things that also fall outside of security. So um, your application is best optimized if you use auto scaling in the cloud, right? That's not a security standard. It's a best practice, um, or a guideline or a standard that we want to adopt full scale.
Products or like cloud initiatives that haven't worked with this that you can think of, or where it wouldn't work even?
I think if you are at so I think of the communities that practice it as a way of almost getting to a center of excellence, like evolving into it, depending on what you're working on. And so, we would leave the client well before it got there. So we hope that that's where it evolves to, that you've, like I said, you've created a maturity in the focus area that everybody agrees, these guys know what they're talking about, and I should check with them, right? Or I should, have them look at my application through that lens and make sure it's good.
That makes sense. And then from a, like I said, a size, like a company size or organization size, you're a like a mid cap company, like on the like 100 million, like random head, and you have an IT team that consists of all the components that we talk about that make this kind of work well. But if it's a smaller organization, do you see it having issues on a small scale, just from time
Um,
management?
Probably time management, is probably the biggest issue. If you're a pretty lean IT department, you're not able to necessarily run that kind of a cross enterprise, time resource crunch. But that said, I think more than the size of the company, I would look for more of the, what I'd call maybe symptoms that you're trying to resolve, right? So some of the symptoms are that cloud level maturity or whatever, application development maturity. Where are you in that? Is there a lot of variety amongst the different groups, or diversity of maturity in those different groups? And say, you know what, we need to bring them together and have them, work up to that. Another symptom I would look for is a shadow IT. So multiple teams running multiple infrastructures, would be another sort of symptom that said maybe we should probably get together and work through what how we really want to, form a synergy around this.
And just for people that I know that watch this, and the reason like diffuse some information for people that are getting kind of like further along in their career. When you say shadow IT teams, you mean like doing pretty much like the same thing with two different infrastructures with two different teams that don't really cross communicate at all, and they may not even know about each other until
That.
they're there, right? Yeah, yeah. I just want to. I know what it means, but I just want to make sure I explain it to certain people that watch it. Like, I wonder what that means, you know. Yeah, so that is honestly, I would say, from a business optimization standpoint, that's what like business stakeholders look to see. It's like the breaking down of like teams that do the same thing in organization, because that's like money burned, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's reasons for that. I mean, I can deploy it faster on the cloud. That's what usually happens, right? A team will go, I can deploy faster. I don't have to work with IT or, the enterprise IT. I can go faster this way. And that's fine, but then it tends to get rogue.
yeah, yeah.
um,
And do you go in when you start this and do some like investigative work, some like seeing where there's already like issues, like you said, symptoms, and start like showing examples of like how you can make it better, and that's your part of your like sales pitch, I suppose, internally to implement this? Or is there, it's already, they know where the problem is and it's like, hey, we need a doctor immediately?
yeah, I think it's really about context in the beginning, right? How'd you get here? Um, and there's really, really good business reasons. Like I said, we deployed faster, this way. And we were so focused on features and functionality, we didn't care about, resiliency. And so there's in the beginning, there's maybe some context, but that's in the past. And I kind of think, okay, so now you're at a point where it's a good time to pull this together, and to, you know, create less complexity and less every group on their own here. There's one pipeline that works for this group. Let's let's adopt it everywhere, right? Instead of having everybody try to keep up their own stack of, pipeline pieces, right?
So I'm just gonna move slightly. So with what you've done, communities of service, and what you kind of operate in, do you like what you do? You
Ah, I love it.
okay.
um,
Why do you love it?
Partly because if we weren't adding value, we wouldn't be here. And so it always feels good if you're working for a company where you think of what you're doing as adding value. Since they pay us as a consultant, they wouldn't extend us if we weren't adding that value. And that just feels like, okay, good, we're on the right track and we're really helping this company discover and get better. And that's impactful. That feels, good. I've been in industry and sometimes it doesn't feel like what you're doing is adding value, but you have a job and you kind of keep going. This gets renewed all the time, right? So
Nice too, right? You've got to show results as a consultant, right?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little.
Sorry, yeah, I was saying like, and you're kind of scrutinized as well. So you're easy to roll off, right? Is what
Right.
the yeah, because you're a consultant. Well, that's great. For people that are more interested in project governance and just communities of service and the whole, like how to onboard projects correctly, vendors correctly, any IT initiatives correctly. What do you think, if you were talking to people that are looking now, quite in quite desperation on how to make their internal IT project, I suppose, roadmap better, like framework better? Is there anything you would give out to people as like where to start or what to do to try and change internally?
Yeah, I think what I've adopted here is, what is commonly referred to as cloud native principles, and we can talk about probably a whole other blog on that one. But what I think of is, automation used to be nice to have, but not necessarily um, something that people spend a lot of time on. I think that is more and more critical. You can't sync, use your software to document itself, right? Don't create a process where you can just use an API and call out the data that you need, right? And I think that that's a turning point with a lot of IT organizations. They think process to solution to something, and that process doesn't get automated. It just stops at process. So more and more I'm seeing, let's move over to the software is infrastructure now. And so all of that software documents itself. You don't have to have a somebody type in, I'm using this server to put this application on it, right? Um, so I see more and more it's a mindset change more than you have to develop a lot of tools. It's more like get your head around the idea that automation is creates quality.
Kind of knowing your why, right? I mean, like you can build a process on pretty much anything. It's like why are we continuing the process, and is there any way to make it easier, better? Like the how do you get rid of like what is it? Like the least amount of people touching the process usually makes it the best long term. There's like
Yeah, the
a
leanest, right?
yeah, the leanest, right? It's like because usually the error comes somewhere in the chain from somebody, some human, right, or somebody touching something. So, yeah, yeah, that's common amongst people that are really like pro automation as much as possible to make things
Yeah.
like just easier, so
I
you can
mean,
focus
you
on the better
create a
stuff.
more proactive than reactive environment. So instead of scanning the code while it's in production, you gate it before it can deploy, right? You say basically, you can't deploy this code. I've scanned it on its way to production and it didn't pass my gate, right? So
Yeah,
it didn't get deployed. So then they fix it, right? So there's just moving that reaction to proactivity
yeah,
through automation, I think is the big key.
yeah, like the test driven development, right?
Automate your integrated testing.
And when you get it there, it's already gone through all the checks and balances, and yeah, yeah. And then from your perspective, I know sprint industries work well. Like MVP, does this work in an MVP environment where you're standing it up and you're pushing it out, or is there too many like security and checks and balances that you have to go through where MVP doesn't really make sense?
I mean, security is always a balance, right? That, you want everything to be as secure as possible. Um, but sometimes that becomes both onerous and cost prohibitive, right? So you have to understand what the risks are. You have to understand, what the standards are and how you can build to them. But again, you can automate a lot of that as well. You can't necessarily stave off how many attacks you have, but you can automate how they are deemed, right?
Yeah. Well, that's that's a lot. Just in terms of like learning for people that are going to watch this, I really appreciate you sharing this information and helping me with this tech exec series journey that I'm on. Um, I'd love to get you, again, and we can talk about the what was it, the app native.
Cloud
It's something
native principles.
yeah, that's something I'm not very aware of. So that would be cool. Maybe, maybe this time, Q3 or Q4, we can talk more about that. But I really appreciate your time.
No,
Thanks a lot.
Gregory, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.